Bayern 2, Dortmund 2. I sort of sense at the end of the day, this was a result that neither club was really happy with. Stefan, I had the sense that there was quite a bit of frustration on both sides. We get into Leverkusen and their season in a moment, but obviously this point helps Bayern more than it does Dortmund. I think for Dortmund, the hope that they could maybe catch up with and get a Champions League spot, I think it gets somewhat buried. It's a 6-point swing now in 5 games. That's a big ask, considering 2 was in between them. And Leipzig with a good result this weekend, right? Frankfurt are probably out of reach now. We get to talk about Frankfurt towards the end of the podcast. They're probably out of reach now, really. So it's really only one Champions League spot left that they could feasibly reach. And I just think that 1 point for them is a huge disappointment. Bayern, I think, were there for the taking. I think there was an opportunity there for Dortmund to do what they did last year and win at the Allianz Arena. And then I think any other day and in any other season, this is probably a result that they would celebrate. Yet I had the sense that they were really heavily disappointed. Really comes down to that Pascal Groß chance, doesn't it? The one after Anton made it 2-2 where he breaks through and lobs the ball over Urbik and that doesn't go in. But it also, the fact that they conceded 2 really quick goals after going up 1-0 with a wonderful Bayer header. Guerrero and Gnabry scoring within 4 minutes, 65th and 69th, and the Gnabry goal in particular. I mean, that was like slaloms. That was like downhill ski slalom through Dortmund's defense. It was so easy, right? And those are just the moments that really. It's
a very Bavarian
Dortmund.
Metaphor there for our worldwide listeners.
Oh, it's a Bavarian team.
He dribbled like a skier through the Bavarian Alps.
Yeah, no, if there's any snow left these days in the Bavarian Alps, I think that's the other question. But, it just, that goal in particular seemed very easy. Very easy. And that's too often the case. But, yeah, I think, starting with Dortmund, this is just 2 points dropped that I think is going to really, really hurt them.
Yeah, it was such an odd game. We spent the whole week kind of talking about the fact that nobody was really talking about this match. We did our preview show talking about how it's ranting rather about how it's not the Der Klassiker. The Klassiker is this kind of myth. And
I need to intersect you here. And then the DFL taunted us by putting it on the advertising board, saying it's always the Klassiker.
Oh God, yeah. I mean,
I know who's responsible for this. I know who you are.
I said this during the game as well on social media about how many times the commentators were cramming it in. Look, we know a lot of the guys do the commentary for the DFL games, and they're all very, very good. They're all very professional. Yeah. They're all excellent at their jobs. And I know that they're probably getting this from the bosses to kind of keep cramming it in, and it's on the billboards, as you said, it's in the newsletters, it's plastered across everything. But I think it was a game that once it kicked off, we realised very quickly that these were 2 very tired, very injury ravaged, exhausted football teams, and neither of them really wanted this game to take place. Both of them obviously had very grueling Champions League games in midweek. Both still got Champions League games to go. Obviously, Dortmund are more or less out the Champions League unless some sort of miracle happens. Bayern's still in for a shout against Inter Milan. But so Bayern had that to contend with, but also Dortmund have to contend with, as you said, their kind of hopes of maybe trying to get back into top 4 before the end of the season. But for one reason or another, both these teams just really struggled to actually kind of win this game. I thought in the first half, Bayern kind of exerted their control in the game. It was a match in which they had a handful of chances in the first half. And we went in at half-time kind of saying to our subscribers in the live chat that we have every match day that, it was amazing that it was still 0-0. And we just assumed that Bayern would kind of sleepwalk to a pretty comfortable win there. And then all of a sudden, boom, Kim drops a clanger and lets Maximilian Bayer head home at the back post, relatively unopposed. And you thought, oh, right, maybe we have a bit of an upset here. But then, equally, Bayern bring on Serge Gnabry, who's obviously been out injured, who's been on the bench, who's probably a lot fitter and having played far fewer games than a lot of the players on this pitch. And within like 10 minutes, he just ran through that Bayern defence. Sorry, the Dortmund defence, as if they weren't there, especially the second goal where Emre Can and Niklas Süle just kind of watched him drift by them. It was kind of classic kind of Serge Gnabry, perfect substitute appearance from him to kind of turn the game in their favour. And then in the last minute, or not last minute, but 15 minutes before full time, I thought some truly outstanding skill from Sergio Garassi to kind of for anyone who's missed, it's worth watching the highlights of all these goals. Actually, they're all good goals, but his was wonderful, where he's kind of fighting off the marking of, I'm not actually sure who it was. I think Eric Dyer he was up against. Wonderful kind of bit of skill as he's kind of falling back to kind of get a scissor kick off, and then obviously Anton kind of taps it home. So it felt to me like a game where kind of individual brilliance kind of stood out against two teams who just didn't really have the cohesion or the players or the stamina to kind of dominate this match. And I guess in a sense, a draw was probably quite fair. But as you said, it doesn't really suit anyone. It probably suits Bayern slightly more because of what happened in the Leverkusen game, which we'll come to. I don't know if it was Thomas Müller or Vincent Kompany after the match saying, a point's probably fair. We probably shouldn't be too bothered about that. And I thought, there's no way they'd be saying this if Leverkusen had won their game. A draw against Dortmund in this match would have been seen as a disaster, I think, if Leverkusen had won that match. But, fate should have it that they were able to kind of take a bit of a breather and accept 2 points dropped. But as you said, Dortmund are still kind of wanting for European football, and the chase for the top four. And I don't know, it felt to me, Manuel, like a game where both teams kind of disappointed. I'm trying not to be too much of a downer on this one, but it just felt like a match where we didn't really see the best of either of these sides because, for the most part, they were both playing their B teams.
Yeah, that's how I felt about it. I wrote that the Klassiker wasn't really a classic. I think it was entertaining because we had 4 goals, but the level. I remember clashes between those two sides, even in more recent memory, even including the one last year that Dortmund won. Right, that the level was just way higher, and. It just feels like, it's not just Bayern and Dortmund. There's a lot of Bundesliga teams that are literally limping to the finish line. And I think this is a result of the many games and probably also the fact that Germany, with the Euros and a lot of, I think the Bundesliga clubs were the most represented at the Euros, especially in the later stages of the competition, right? And I think that is an impact, and we've discussed in the past that Bundesliga squads aren't as deep as they are in England or Spain or Italy, and there's always a very conservative approach towards building squads and not necessarily having redundancies is something that Bundesliga clubs don't necessarily like because it's something that they can't plan for. Which is why Bayern, for example, only have one backup number 10, and that's Thomas Müller, and we can talk about him maybe in a moment. And this is the same is true for Dortmund. Squad depth looks very thin at the moment, especially in defense, where I think they don't have the strength to really fight on all fronts. I said jokingly in the chat that with both these teams being in the Club World Cup, come August, neither club might have any players left to be able to play. This is just a continuation right away, right? Like, it's not like, the season ends and these guys will all have a rest. That's not even happening here, right? A whole bunch of them will play the UEFA Nations League Final Four, and then Bayern and Dortmund are headed to the United States, and we're getting to the point now where Dortmund are thinking of signing Mats Hummels for the tournament, and Bayern extended the contract with Thomas Müller, and some of it is, I think, is just due to the fact that they need these guys to fill up the squad. But my point being is that you can see in this match that these teams are tired, and for Dortmund, the season in Europe will be over on Tuesday. For Bayern, they will try to somehow survive in the Champions League. I'm slightly optimistic that they maybe can get a result in Italy. It's going to be hard, of course, but I think they could do it. But then what, right? Where are they going to find the strength to continue on in that competition after that? Is really questionable. And I think we're getting to the point now where you showcase events in the big leagues are no longer showcase events because these clubs are just exhausted. And I think that is something too. I mean, we had this discussion about the level of play in this game and the squad depth and the way squads were put together. Thomas Müller playing the full 90 minutes. I personally thought he had his moments, but there was times where you could just tell that the game is too fast for him now, right? And but what else is poor Vinny Kompany supposed to do? He has to play the 35-year-old number 10 because there's no one else in the squad. And yeah, I think that's where like you look at all of these things and I felt like the game was unsatisfactory is maybe the best way to put it. And I sum it all up, it just, you used to have this really like satisfying feeling after games that were close between those two teams where I'm like, yeah, that was really good and I wish it would go on for another 10, 15 minutes. Whereas with this one, it was over and I almost felt relief for the players that were on the field that they finally got to get their rest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Thomas Müller one's really interesting because it shows Bayern's kind of necessity at this point. They just don't have anyone they could put in there. I did kind of walk away from this game kind of wondering about Vincent Kompany and his coaching of Bayern this season. And, in the first half of the season, we gave him a lot of credit for the way they sorted out that defence and the way that he had Upamecano and Kim playing so well, and Davies was looking back to his best. They were kind of jokingly saying, he's playing for a contract, but he was still playing very well for the first time in like 2 or 3 years. Yeah. He'd done a decent job of continuing with Konrad Lima at right back, who's doing okay there. And it kind of looked like Bayern kind of had their house in order defensively. And they were scoring goals up front. I mean, it was more or less, wait and see till Musiala does something. Hopefully Harry Kane can tap the ball in. But it worked because defensively they were solid and they were still scoring goals, so they were winning games. Mm-hmm. We've got to this point now at this stage of the season where that defence has fallen apart because literally everybody's injured. Manuel Neuer's out, Upamecano's out, Davies is out. So you've only really got one player in Kim who's probably a starter in that back line. And even he's carrying injury. He looks exhausted. I thought he obviously had a terrible game and got pulled off in this match because of the manner in which he obviously gave away the first goal. But then that also kind of highlights not only the defensive issues, which you could understandably say, well, there's only so much that Bayern and Vincent Kompany can do because, he's missing his key players. He's having to play backups here, there, and everywhere. But then if you look at the attack, we've talked about this for a couple of weeks now, Bayern do more or less have their full-strength front line, except for Jamal Musiala there. And I'm really intrigued by the lack of imagination that Kompany is showing in trying to solve the problems to that attacking lineup. Musiala missing is obviously a huge problem for them. But as far as I can tell, the only kind of real decisions that Kompany's done to try and fix that is to play Guerrero in there against Inter Milan, which kind of worked, but I don't think it was terribly good. And then in this game, he obviously brought in Thomas Müller, who I thought was okay. He was good as a kind of almost a target man. He has there was 2 moments for he obviously set up Guerrero for his goal, but he also kind of set up Harry Kane for a shot in the first half, I think it was. And he's still got that technique where he can lay a ball off to somebody if they swing it into him in the box. But I was chatting to our subscribers about this. I was like, I don't understand why he's so reticent to play Michael Olsen at number 10 or Leroy Sané at number 10, or because we're talking about the way that Serge Gnabry's kind of came into his game the last kind of couple of weeks and how he's looking back to his best. Now, Gnabry is an interesting one, and he can sometimes kind of flat to deceive because I think he does suit being an impact sub at times rather than a kind of starter. But you would think looking ahead to the Inter Milan game, Kompany would be really thinking, I should try and shuffle the pack here with his front line. I should be trying Gnabry out left. I should be trying Olsen in the middle. I should be trying Leroy Sané out right. Things aren't working. I need to shake things up. And he just doesn't really seem too interested in doing that. And I just kind of wonder if that just falls back on his background as a player. He obviously knows how to set up defenses, but in the grand scheme of things, he's not very imaginative from an attacking point of view. And I think that kind of cost Bayern a wee bit in this game, in the sense that, they just looked very predictable. And I think it cost him quite a lot in the Inter Milan game, to be honest with you. I know Guerrero scores in this game, so can't be critical of him too much. I know Thomas Müller got an assist, so you don't want to be too critical either. But I just kind of have this lingering fear that they're just going to set up in a very predictable way against Inter Milan, and it's not going to cause too many problems. And interestingly enough, in both of these games, Harry Kane, I think, and I don't want to keep going back to this because I don't want to start building up a reputation for being a Harry Kane hater, but in both of these games, Kane had chances, but you just fluffed the lines numerous times. He had 4 shots on target in this game against Dortmund. He had 2 shots on target against Inter Milan, not including that absolute whiffed volley that he had, which he should have scored. 6 attempts on goal in both these matches, so 6 each, so 12 in total, and no goals, and an XG of just 1.3, of course, across both games. And it feels to me like maybe just because Musiala's missing, but also because this front line is just so regimented and not showing too much creativity, that Kane's just not been anywhere near good enough in both these games. And that's kind of indicative of this entire front line right now.
Well, I mean, I think you're quite right? That the creative aspect in attack has been an issue. And I mean, we discussed that earlier this season, that sometimes they just would score 1 or 2 goals, or they would finally score a second goal. The Augsburg game comes to mind, right, from a penalty, and then add a third in the end, and the result looks a lot better than it actually was. There's a few games where Musiala would score a single goal, the St. Pauli game, for example, right? The game against Lisbon as well. And you would kind of wonder, okay, well, that's not a lot of attacking output here, right? The goals usually come when the game is decided, not before that, and it would be a lot of huffing and puffing. And defensively, they were very sound. I mean, Kompany made this point after the Dortmund game, that his team over the last 2 games, and so the Dortmund Inter Milan game, they had 50 shots on goal, or almost 50 shots on goal. He said it was actually 48, but then when you break that down, it's actually just 7 shots on goal, right? So in hockey, if you're a hockey fan, they actually only count shots on goal. They don't count a shot that goes towards the goal, and they actually also only count shots on goal that the goalie had to save. So if it's a post or crossbar, they don't even count those. And I think we should probably do the same here. Because if it's some shot from 30 meters out over the crossbar, is that really a shot on goal? In my opinion, it's not. I think it should be a shot on target, right?
Yeah.
And when you then break that down to just 7, that number is a lot less than 48. And actually, in the grand scheme of things, not great, Stefan. And, actually kind of highlights that, there's a lot of opportunities and moments where Bayern Munich look dangerous, but they don't actually create really big chances.
Yeah, and it's going to be a huge problem for them in this Inter Milan game, who Inter Milan are experts at playing defensive football. And I don't know, I just feel like the whole kind of system for Bayern now is kind of crumbling because they relied so much on that decent backline, and it's kind of falling apart. And they just don't really have a coherent, multi-pronged attack that can kind of compensate for it. It's not like they're a team right now who are just outscoring their defense right at this moment in time. They are kind of faltering, and I guess we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens. The proof will be in the pudding. They might go on and beat Inter Milan. They might put in a heroic performance, and then Leroy Sané or Serge Gnabry score a hat trick, and it's like, well, do you know what? Everything's fine. But where Kompany has clearly improved a number of those defensive players in that squad, I am probably struggling to think of any attacking players in that team who've actually excelled, except for Michael Olise, who was potentially always that good. He was always going to do that well, so it's hard to... I don't want to take away from Kompany, but if you look through that front line, has Harry Kane got any better this season? No. Has Leroy Sané got any better this season? No. Has Jamal Musiala got any better this season? I would say he's probably not. He's probably just doing as well as last season, if not a slightly poorer in terms of his actual numbers. I know he's got injured, so that's not his fault. And Mateus Tell was punted out the door in January. So,
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing to maybe bear in mind as we kind of get to this really, really tricky stage of the season, how Kompany addresses these problems in front of him and if he has answers to them.
So yeah, it's a really good point. I think, I mean, it's something that we have to discuss, and I think that they will have to reshuffle that attacking line in the summer. With Müller gone, right, there's going to be resources and space available. I think, and this is maybe worth for doing an extra show on at some point, but the pursuit of Florian Wirtz, why, Wirtz would probably fix a lot of the problems in this team, I think would be just as dangerous as going just after Harry Kane, right? Because what if both Wirtz and Musiala are hurt? Then this team is very toothless, and I think you'd probably be better off taking the 140, 150 million euros that it takes to sign Florian Wirtz and focus on getting more Michael Olise's into the squad. But I mean, not more players like him, but players that you can pick up for that sort of price category and turn into a superstar. Michael Olise has been immense. I mean, what a signing he has been. He's just incredible. And it's probably what's rescuing Max Eberl's job at the moment, considering some of the other signings that have not really worked out. I mean, so, find more players like that. I think you're a lot better off. I mean, I did some digging into this Luis Enrique guy that they're looking at Olympique Marseille. It looks like a really good player that they can probably get for 20, 30 million euros. Will probably fill the Kingsley Coman role quite nicely, increases market value. That's the sort of signing where I'm thinking like, that actually could work. And I think that is probably a better focus for them. And so rather than this pursuit of a single player that could end them in a similar situation than now with Harry Kane, I think is quite dangerous. And I think too, for Harry Kane, before we go to Leverkusen, this game on Wednesday against Inter Milan could be defining for his career at Bayern Munich. This is the game that he was signed for, to get the coals out of the fire, to score the decisive goals. That on Wednesday could be his career in a nutshell, positive or negative for Bayern Munich, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. As as one of his subscribers said during the Inter Milan game where he misses that volley, like that's exactly why Bayern signed him for 100, 120 million euros to score that goal. And look, it's not just something about Harry Kane. It's something it's a criticism that was often thrown at Robert Lewandowski at this stage of the Champions League. You have to be the guy who scores those chances. These strikers do not get the same amount of chances in these Champions League games as they're used to in the Bundesliga. So that's when they have to prove that they can be as efficient in front of goal and take the few chances that they get. And yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Like I said, Harry Kane could score against Inter Milan. He could score a brace, and then all of a sudden he turns the game back in their favour. But you're right, all eyes will be on him and see what he can do, because it's all well and good. Things working for him when he's got penalties to score and he's got Joao Musiala running off him, and potentially, undoubtedly one of the best kind of number 10s in the world. But it's all very different when that guy gets injured and he's relying on 2 or 3 out of form players. Whereas Leroy Sané or whoever else, or Thomas Müller behind him, or Rafa Guerrero as his number 10, that's when he has to kind of really prove that he can actually step up and be more, and be a match winner, and be a player who can actually create chances for Bayern. And that's exactly what they're going to need against Inter Milan. But we didn't see it in the first leg, and I don't think we saw much of it against Dortmund either.